As Chris said, Kathy Giusti is one of those patient advocates who's changing the world as we know it. But I'd like to read the Fortune magazine article that she was mentioned in because it really sets the stage for how patients can take the reins and make doctors understand there's a bigger world out there. This is Fortune. On the heels of her diagnosis of multiple myeloma in 1996, former Searle and Merck exec Kathy Giusti resolved to whip a fragmented cancer research community into shape by disrupting old models and centralizing data. This radical collaborative approach would, Giusti hoped, spur more effective and personalized treatment. The results? 10 new approved therapies for multiple myeloma in the past 10 years, and a tripling of patients' post-diagnosis life expectancy, accomplishments clearly bearing the fingerprint of her organization, the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. And, no surprise, she was nowhere close to done. The MMRF plans to build on what Giusti calls the largest, deepest, most robust data set in the field of multiple myeloma, with over 1,000 patients sequenced in order to keep the disruption going. So on that, I should say, Kathy, great to meet you and congratulations.
Thank you.
I'd like to start with the basics because you are the patient advocate, businesswoman, disruptor. But take me back to the day when you were diagnosed. What did you hear?
So when I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, I initially heard the word cancer, and I thought, well, there's progress in cancer. I'm not going to panic about this. But then when I researched multiple myeloma, I realized the statistics were really against me. I heard 100% fatal, and that I would live 3 to 5 years at best. And I knew how to go look at a pharmaceutical pipeline, so I was studying everything, looking for just a glimmer of hope, and there was nothing.
And at that stage in your life, you had one child, a 1-year-old,
right,
and another one that didn't even know he was on the way.
Right. I had my daughter was 18 months old, and I did end up having a son after my diagnosis.
Tell me about your sister.
So I have an identical twin sister. And we grew up very, very close, and we got through this whole world of multiple myeloma after the last number of decades. And last year, ironically, as an identical twin, she was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. And I think this gets a little bit into the story of how families and ends of one can have interesting stories, and how we all should play a role as much as we can in research, because our grandfather had multiple myeloma, our grandmother had breast cancer. And so we ended up deciding that we would be research specimens along the way. We'd always done bone marrow biopsies together. We'd always been tested together. But at this point, we also did quite a bit of germline testing with our family, so we could start to uncover and unravel some of the secrets of cancer.
So what role did your 2 decades in pharma and being a business executive play in your starting the foundation and, frankly, being a patient who wouldn't take no for an answer?
Well, I think the fact that I'd never worked in a nonprofit helped me, because I actually only knew how to run a business. So having come from the pharmaceutical industry, my goal was always make sure we got new products to market quickly, make sure we measured everybody by their results, and make sure we ran anything I was starting like a Fortune 100 company. So when I started the MMRF, that's really what I ended up doing. Was I really started a virtual biotech. It doesn't look anything like a patient advocacy group. So reporting into the CEO of the MMRF is a team that only does CROs and clinical trials, a team that's all PhDs and scientists, a team that's Masters of Public Health to do the educational piece, and now, of course, we have to build out a whole technology team, and then the fundraising.
So if you didn't run the foundation like a business, do you think you would have had the 10 breakthrough drugs in 10 years?
No, not at all. I think the beauty of being a patient and a businesswoman was, as a patient, I looked at everything with a specific lens, right? So if I was doing a bone marrow biopsy on a Friday night and I came out of the exam room and I found 3 researchers with an igloo cooler waiting for my myeloma cells, it would hit me, wow, tissue is incredibly precious. I can't believe these guys are making sure these cells stay viable through their Friday night. And that allowed me to then say, well, how do I work with the scientists in the field to solve the business problem? So I would sit down with, fortunately, a very small myeloma community at the time, primarily Ken Anderson at Dana-Farber. There was Keith Stewart at Princess Margaret, Bill Dalton at Moffitt. These men have actually done incredibly well business-wise. It's interesting. But we all started together, and they looked at everything like, we can't get the basic biology of this disease, and I would look at it as a patient and a businesswoman and say, well, why can't you get tissue? And then as soon as we would identify the problem together, I would come up with the business solution, and they would help with the science. And I think that's how you have to run things.
So let me ask you the indelicate question.
Yeah.
When you are a woman with a strong opinion, not necessarily a myeloma specialist, but with a pharma background, and you spoke up, how were you received?
Well, I think initially, I think if I was trying to do this now, it would be a whole different world, right? Because myeloma is really busy, and it's a much bigger community, and it's crowded. But when I started, I think this was nearly 20 years ago, right? So everybody that was working in myeloma had no funding, no awareness. Most of their offices were in the basement. And now here I came in, and I was saying, I care deeply about this. I'm going to go help raise the money to bring scientists to the fold. I'm going to try to create the business models for you. I think I was the only game in town, so we all listened to each other at the time, and it was a really small, passionate community, so we all got along really well. And then as time went by, the scientists came in, and now you're working with the pharma companies. And again, I have to say, in many ways, I was fortunate. Think about it. It was people like Deborah Dunsire, Mark Levin that were at Millennium, like really good people that were coming into the myeloma space, and we all worked beautifully together. Today, I think it's harder because the community is huge. There's 10 drugs approved. There are a multitude. At any one time, we're working with 30 different companies. Everybody can find each other. We like to be the group that convenes and says, what are the questions that we need to answer for the patients we serve, and bring everybody back together. But they can always go around and create their own islands as well if they like to.
So as a businesswoman, how do you define results in this arena?
So I define results as how many drugs have we gotten approved?
Would you give yourself an A with regard to that?
I would give the community, all of us, an A together, absolutely. I would look at 5-year survival, which, it was in the 20s when I was diagnosed, and now it's up in the 40s, and I think that's pretty impressive. And I would say tripling of the lifespan is amazing. But I will tell you, there is no room at all for complacency. The disease is still fatal. And I know people say, well, it's a chronic disease, and everybody says to the patients, it's a chronic disease. No, it's a fatal disease. And we all wake up every day wondering not if we'll relapse, but when we will relapse.
So even 20 years later, do you have Damocles' sword hanging over your head?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not like I show up at Dana-Farber where I'm treated and get my test results and everything looks perfectly fine. It's not like everybody says, oh, Kathy, you're doing great, it's a chronic disease. There's always something that comes back that makes you worry, and you think you have to go for more tests, and you live like that. It's easier because we have options, but 25% of our patients either don't respond or relapse in 1 year. And I think the beauty of data is, how do you identify those patients, those high-risk patients, unmet medical need, and how do we all work together, academia, community, payers, everybody, to say, and pharma, to say, how do we find those drugs? How do we find those combinations? Everybody's talked about the last day or two, and it's important.
So what are the roles of the democratization of DNA, as I call it, and data sharing?
So the way we looked at this, and I think this was important, I was frustrated that everybody had their own data set. And so what we decided to do in myeloma, remember, this is a disease, fatal, but very uncommon, and highly, highly heterogeneous. So if you want to find the subtypes, you really do need a lot of tissue and a lot of data. So we decided to launch a study called COMPASS. The COMPASS study takes 1,000 patients. We worked with 75 centers to do this. And we take their bone marrows at diagnosis before they have ever started treatment. And then we do DNA.
Can you just underscore how important that is?
Yeah.
Because in so many diseases, people go out and get a first treatment, and then they start collecting scans. Yeah. It's talking about a baseline.
Yeah, and it's hard. This is why when everybody says we're going to go collect data from patients, you have to understand that a patient is really nervous at that point in time. They'd just been diagnosed with this disease, and now you're saying to them, we may need an extra bone marrow, we want to get you into this COMPASS study, and they don't yet know the importance of their tissue and their data in finding a cure for their own disease. I think that's one of the most important things that foundations like ours can do, is help researchers by letting patients know you are part of the solution. So in the COMPASS trial, what's beautiful about it is we do whole genome, whole exome, and RNA sequencing, and then we follow these patients, which again, this is a really hard thing to do, and I know on the Obama Precision Medicine Initiative, I was on that team too, but you're trying to hold on to these patients for 5 to 7 years. When they relapse, we get the tissue again, and we sequence them again, and all that relapse data goes in, all their clinical data goes in, and then we also do a lot of work in looking at MRD and understanding our patients better. That was a $40 million study that our foundation had to take on because there was no data sharing going on. And it was started 4 or 5 years ago. I think things are starting to change a little bit now. At any rate, any scientist in the world can go on and get all of our data and play with it. The tools are there, and be able to use it in whatever way they want. And we built it as a pre-competitive consortia. 4 pharma companies paid for half of the study, and then philanthropy paid for the other half.
Are you the face of the new model?
I don't know. I mean, I would like to think that I'm the person that still has a fatal disease and has nothing to lose. So
is that hard to say?
No, not at all, because it is what it is, and I've lived my life kind of knowing that. I think the point is that there's no bad actors in this. It's a very old, archaic system. And I don't think the incentives always align. I just don't. And I think the beauty of what we can do in myeloma, and we are one tiny cancer. Like, it's not like I'm this amazing, successful woman. It's one tiny cancer. I can get my arms around the community. But I think what we do is we bring people together and we ask the tough questions. Like, why can't you share? What is stopping you from sharing? If I have this question to ask, that we found a new mutation in the COMPASS study and we really need to validate it, and I know you have data, Ken Anderson at Dana-Farber, and you have it, Nooper at Mass General. What are we going to do about this? If nothing else, can we develop a federated model and start answering the questions for the patients? But we bring people together and we ask them, and we bring the attorneys together and we solve for it. And all of this is now science and business and technology, and they all play together.
So what's your leadership style?
I would say it's visionary. I would say it's more that I really can look at the future and say, I do believe that, at least in myeloma, I will find there's not that many huge genomic data sets in the field of myeloma. I do believe we will convene them all. We will find a way to do data sharing. I'm not going to tell you that everybody's going to sit with one data set all in one pretty little place. I don't know that's going to happen, but I'm not going to give up until we can answer the questions for the patients. If I think a patient in our COMPASS study is high risk and they're relapsing, those are all the patients we're seeing right up front, and we see a signature around that, I'd like to know that somebody else is seeing it at this center and this center and this center. And I don't think that's too much to ask.
There's an extraordinary article that Kathy had written about her, and she spoke to a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. I would recommend that anybody sort of look it up and read it in its thoroughness. It's really quite something. But you chose the Wall Street Journal and this reporter for a reason. Why?
I trusted her. So this was when we were doing germline testing, and I wanted somebody to write the story on it, because we talk about educating patients, and what we have learned is when you start talking to a patient about genomics or tissue banking and all these things that they need to do, or even precision medicine, their eyes start to glaze over. So I think you always have to make it into a story and help them to understand what's going on. So when we did the Wall Street Journal piece, she actually came to our home, and the question was, would my sister get sequenced? Would my mother get sequenced? Would my daughter get sequenced? And would my son? And everybody took a different approach in our family. My mom.
Is really interesting.
It was.
Everybody had a different reason for either opting in or opting out.
It was really fascinating. But everybody read the article, And my mom at 85 felt like she had given me myeloma, and she wanted to do her due diligence, that her father had had it, and if she could find some answers, she wanted to do that. My sister, my twin, is an attorney, so she was a little more skeptical than us. My daughter is just a wellness fanatic and decided, okay, well, I'm really going to focus on mammograms and things like that. And my son is a baseball pitcher, and he loves data, so he was the first one to really want to get all the information that he possibly could. And I think that's how you have to educate patients. You don't say, oh, you have this translocation, you have this. You explain to them, you could be part of the research process. You need to be part of the research process. You have to help academia and the community and everybody else figure out the answers.
So one of the things that's been fascinating about this conference is that if I had talked about pharma and biotech and academia and patients cooperating 20 years ago, you know, our heads would have spun around. Everybody else was the enemy. This conference has really been about collaboration, the fact that we can't do it alone,
right,
and phenomenal hope.
Yeah, yeah. I think what happens in myeloma is when you can build a community. And again, I tell you, it's small, so it's easier to get your arms around it. But when you build that kind of a community, and we've all been together for a long time as family, and you have a team like ours that has raised the money, over $300 million, that we've given to the scientific community. We developed the models, so we developed the tissue bank, we developed our own clinical network, we worked with the Broad and TGen to sequence our genome, we paid $40 million for Compass, and we don't just fund it, we do it. I mean, our whole team does all of this work, and then we invite the myeloma community in to work with us. So I think when you have a team like ours that does all the project management and the funding, it enables the scientists and the clinicians to do their jobs.
So from your perspective, then what's the importance, if there is one, of crowdsourcing?
Well, I think what we found, just to give you an example, is on our Compass study, there are new mutations that we have found in that study, and now we want to make sure that everybody's looking at it carefully. In addition to that, we have found in the Compass study that triplets are better than doublets, transplant is better than not, and we also found tremendous data. Our Compass study was able to get a high percentage of African Americans, which is often hard to do, but myeloma does skew African American. So we want to make sure that anything we're finding in there gets blown out of the water. If you're seeing something of interest, that everybody works on it. But what we also find is that our pre-competitive consortium, the pharma companies have a lot of turnover. So the guys that were trained on how to use the Compass data set turn over, and our team has to go back in and motivate the next team to go in and look at the Compass data, or our scientists and clinicians are busy. So you have to make these tools really easy. I think crowdsourcing is identify the question we want to ask and open it up to anybody that's working in bioinformatics in these spaces to come in, do the work together, and work on it together. We just literally had a data jamboree here on Friday with GNS, for example, to try to bring people together and create some of those models of sharing.
And so the role of technology with regard to sharing data and set points, how has that changed what you envisioned years ago?
It's dramatic. I mean, when I was diagnosed, there was no internet. So it shows you how long ago that was. You know, in today's world, we literally do every search. We send the data out to you. We encourage all of our patients to know what subtype are you, what kind of genomic aberrations do you have. We help them to know if a trial is going to open. I mean, everything comes right to you as a patient. On the data side, you know, you're trying to find the right technology partners to house your data, aggregate it, and use the tools so you can share it with everybody.
What has been your learning curve? Has it been exponential? Have some things been tougher than others?
I would say, you know, in myeloma I've done well, but, and we can talk about, I've shifted roles a little bit, but now I'm focused more across all cancers, and I find it takes endless hours to stay on top of this. I literally must have spent 50 hours trying to figure out the Obama program, which I was part of, the Biden program, Sean Parker's program, the Collaborative Cancer Cloud, the CBio, I mean, just even understanding the full landscape of what is out there and trying to stay on top of that, that's a big learning curve on the technology side. And then helping all cancers, and especially the ones that are disruptors and trying to do great work, stay together and work on that together, that's tough lifting right now.
Are you emboldened by Sean Parker's pledge? Is this where the future is going?
Well, one thing I like, and I don't know enough about Sean Parker's whole program, but one thing I do like is I think, just like I say, myeloma is a bit of a pilot where one cancer we can try to find new ways of bringing people together to see if you can share the data. Is it federated? What does it look like? Can we follow other models that are out there? We don't want to reinvent the wheel. If some groups are doing something, we want to follow their guidelines too. I do like Sean Parker focused on a specific area like immune. I mean, it's getting to be a bigger area, but I do like the fact that he did that. Whether he would ever get to myeloma, I think this happens with the uncommon cancers. I couldn't wait for the government to do that. I mean, I sat on the National Cancer Advisory Board for 8 years, and I have great respect. I wanted to learn everything about the NIH and NCI, and I took the time to do that, but I don't think I heard myeloma mentioned there more than 2 or 3 times. It's not a big tumor type, but that doesn't make it any different than pancreatic or brain or all the other small tumors that really struggle trying to get critical mass.
2 personal questions. What are you doing at the Harvard Business School, and the tough decision to stop treatment?
Yeah, okay. So for Harvard Business School, Robert Kraft and Jonathan Kraft had made a $20 million gift to Harvard Business School to accelerate precision medicine. And some of you, especially in the Boston area, know that Robert Kraft lost his wife, Myra, to ovarian cancer. And she'd had a specific mutation, and he really wanted to see what could be done from a business standpoint. They both had gone to the business school to push new models forward. So what the dean of the business school then asked me to do was to come up and take on that program with a fellow co-chair, Richard Hammermesh, and to literally put the business plan together by which business, science, and technology could start convening and disrupting and working together. So the difference of that program, which I think is fascinating, is there is funding there. But the point is to bring together the absolute best in class, people that do want to disrupt, and to have very small meetings where the tough questions are asked, where instead of having the meeting where you have it and then you get 10 phone calls later on saying, no, that was a bull, you know what. We actually can ask it of each other and say, well, really, what would it take for you to share this? How would you do this? How would you solve that problem? And then what we will do is make sure we work with the business school to develop the programs around that, disseminate the information. It could be through groups like Faster Cures, but also to educate other groups. It can be foundations or others on how innovative models are being started and how they move. I did it because even though we'd made such progress in myeloma, many people would say to me, it's nice she did that in her own disease, but why not in others? With a sister with breast cancer, my dad died of kidney cancer, my mom has melanoma. I never wanted anybody to think I was beholden to just one disease, although the myeloma community does want me to stay public and external facing, so, and go to bat for them all the time. So I'm half and half, half really focused on myeloma and saying what I think, and then the other half is trying to help other cancers with Robert and Jonathan Kraft in the business school, and Eric Lander's involved too, to do as much as we can in that space.
And the day you decided you didn't want any more treatment, was it gut and science?
Oh, that was such a tough one. So in myeloma, I had done a stem cell transplant with my sister. I had stayed on what's called maintenance therapy, a great drug called Revlimid, for a number of years. And, but it was wearing me down, and I was getting sick quite a bit with all the travel. And I knew I was in a stringent complete remission through PCR that I do at Dana-Farber. And so I went to my doctor and I said, I think maybe I should just go off maintenance therapy. And there's no right or wrong. I mean, I have no idea if I did the right thing or the wrong thing, but I did go off maintenance therapy. And I think to myself now, 7 years later, how much money I have probably saved the insurance companies and how much aggravation I may have saved myself. But I think that's where you start to see the value, and that's the importance of data. Like, I want to go back and see if patients really look at MRD and look at how stringent CRs are, and it's a beautiful gift to give a patient that maybe you don't need to be on therapy, and we can give you a definitive answer as opposed to me wondering all the time, and the payers would be happy too. And I think the beauty of business, technology, and science is finding these questions where everybody agrees, and you work the data sets to get the right answers.
Well, I talk about physician scientists all the time, but I think you're a new category. I think you're the patient scientist.
Well, thank you.
So thanks, Kathy.
Thanks,
everybody.